lender.
Welcome back to Sikkim 365 Radio.
The Sikkim 365 Radio app is sponsored by Alan Samuels Dodge Chrysler Jeep Ram Fiat in Waco. Your friend in the car business at Loop 340 and east of 84. Come by. Let's be friends.
All right, this 4 o'clock hour winding down, and Jeff Howe, he does a talk show, a podcast, writes the hell out of what you do covering the University of Texas, joins us. Craig Smoak, Paul Catalina, David Smoak on Sikkim 365 Radio. Jeff, is there some sort of a weird streak where first-year head coaches at Texas have a tough start no matter when they've arrived?
Yeah, Smokey, if you just look at, the kind of in the post-Darrell Royal era, starting with Fred Akers. Fred Akers is the last first-year Texas head coach to start better than 1-2. And some of that is just kind of where this program has been in those rebuilding cycles. But, David McWilliams got off to a 1-2 start. John Makovic did. Matt Brown did, but this is where I say not all 1-2 starts are created equal, because if you look at Mac's first, that 1-2 start, they go on the road, lose to a top 5 UCLA team, then come back with Major Applewhite making his first career start, go on the road, lose to a top 5 K-State team. And then obviously we remember the way it started for Charlie Strong, a really bad loss to BYU, a close loss to UCLA. And then Tom Herman, kind of the story of his tenure, lose a game in a fashion you had no business losing it into Maryland. And then we're in a game that you probably had no business being in, to a top 5 USC team on the road, and nearly pull it off in double overtime. So history does tell you, Smokey, that, Texas coaches do have a tough time getting off to a tough start. And that's not why Steve Sarkisian has, I wouldn't say expressed caution, but his sentiments to the public have been, look, this is not going to be an opener where you just roll the helmets out and go play. They respect the opponent. Steve Sarkisian has a ton of respect for Billy Napier, given the time that they spent together on the Alabama staff in 2016. So I think if you're looking at not just the history, Smokey, but looking at how, let's say Tom Herman, that regime handled, that first game against Maryland, that was quite frankly a pretty arrogant approach the way they had. Yep. It has been anything but for Steve Sarkisian. It's been very businesslike, and this is a team that, their game week preparations, it's been kind of like Steve Sarkisian's first 8 minutes on the job. Not a lot of hype, not a lot of, wholesale grand declarations about what's going to happen. They've just kind of gone and kept their mouths shut, heads down, and gone about their business. That's
against what they've been for a while, so good for them and good for Sarkisian. Jeff Howe at Jeff Howe 247 on Twitter, on the Horn in Austin, but also at 247 Sports covering UT football.
I just don't understand where you guys are getting this arrogance from Tom Herman. I always saw him as a calm and well-reasoned individual who was lacked to toot his own horn. Jeff, that all being said, the quarterback situation, does it make you nervous that they are not able to say, yes, it's Hudson Card, or yes, it's Casey Thompson?
Hey, Paul, just real quick, was your take on Tom Herman, was that before or after he opened the Baylor game 2 years ago by headbutting one of his own players?
Yeah, and his team went unconscious after that,
I think it was the first Big 12 Media Days where he was 45 minutes late, and I think it was Bob Ballou made a joke like, hey, Coach, not a Lombardi time, and he just lashed out like a cobra at him. So.
And I'll tell you what, that has changed also. My colleague Craig hosts Sark's Coaches Show, and he said, hey, Sark was, unlike the last few guys that have done this, Sark was about 5 to 10 minutes early getting to the Coaches Show. So it's been good on that front. But no, with the quarterback situation, here's what I think it came down to, Paul. And we kind of talked about this after that first scrimmage. But Casey Thompson got the reps with the ones pretty much throughout spring and then in camp leading up to that first scrimmage. And I think the fact that he came out and had 2 turnovers, when you look at how this Texas team is going to have to win, and especially how they're going to have to win early, they're going to rely on Bijan Robinson and that group of running backs. They feel like they've got a chance to play really good, sound defense. And I really do believe that Texas has a chance. When you look at Cameron Dicker handling all the kicking duties now, Deshaun Jameson's one of the best return guys in the country, and just the athleticism they've got at some of their skill positions, I think Texas has a chance to be elite on special teams. So when you're winning with your running back group, defense, and special teams, the ability to take care of the football has to take precedence over everything else. I think that's why Sark ended up going with Hudson Card at the end of the day. In addition to, I think Hudson Card's skill set just fits a little bit better with what Sark wants to do offensively. When you look at, take a look just schematically of what Alabama liked to do and what Sark kind of in this, second edition of his coaching career, Steve Sarkisian 2.0, after what happened at USC, going to Alabama the first time, then to sit with the Atlanta Falcons, and then his most recent run at Alabama. It's a lot of quick passing game, screen game, getting the ball to the perimeter quick, letting guys work in space, heavy on RPOs, heavy on play action. All the things I talked about with a quarterback skill set, a guy that needs to be able to see it quickly, a guy that needs to be able to manipulate the mesh point, a guy that's got to have quick hands. Hudson Card does all those things better than Casey Thompson. But to your question, Paul, I think why Sark is wanting to get Casey Thompson into this game is because after that scrimmage, when he didn't play well and Hudson Card got the bulk of the reps with the ones thereafter, Casey Thompson turned it on and had a really strong finish to Kansas, to the point that I was told in the second scrimmage when Hudson Card was good, Casey Thompson might have been a little bit better. So I think he feels like Casey Thompson has earned the right to play. But at the end of the day, the reason why Hudson Card is starting this ballgame, I really do believe it's about the fact that through the spring and throughout camp, he just did a little bit better job of taking care of the football.
So, Jeff, they made a big hire, a defensive coordinator, obviously, somebody with a proven track record, and Pete Kwiatkowski. But what do you feel like the Longhorn defense has in store this season? Obviously, missed some big pieces from last year, but a lot of talent returning as normal.
Yeah, Craig, let me just say it's been way too long. Good to hear from you.
Good to hear you, man. Great to have you on.
It's, I do think Texas, the strength of this defense, is their interior defensive line, not just, their front line guys. When you're talking about Keandre Coburn's played a lot of football, Moro Ojimo's played a lot of football, Devondre Sweat's back off of a shoulder surgery. They've got a young kid, a true freshman, Byron Murphy out of DeSoto. They don't need to go 4 or 5 deep on the interior defensive line, but he was so good in camp that I think the staff just feels like, look, he's earned the right to play. You got to play him, even though you've got some really talented guys in front of him. So they're so deep and so talented on the interior defensive line. They took Alfred Collins, who was a 5-star signee coming out of high school in the 2020 cycle. They kicked him out the defensive end and are letting him try his hand out there, because I think that's probably the only way at this point he's going to get on the field. So I think Texas, their defensive front is really good. DeMarvion Overshown got so much better at the end of last year. And if you look at his season last year, Overshown's season, the Baylor game was really the turning point for him. Leading up to the Baylor game, through that Oklahoma game last year, he was missing a lot of tackles. His eyes were in the wrong place. People were able to use his aggressiveness and his speed against him with some misdirections and manipulating the mesh point. But the Baylor game was his best game up to that point, and he just steadily got better and better and better, and ended up being the MVP of their Alamo Bowl win over Colorado. So, Overshown had a shoulder surgery in the offseason. He's back and ready to go. As a matter of fact, they held him out of the second scrimmage because they're like, look, he goes so hard in practice and puts his body on the line so much. We just want to make sure this guy gets to the opener. So I think between the interior defensive line and Overshown, they're fine. They should be, other than Oklahoma, I think they're as good as anybody in the Big 12 defensively right there. The areas with Texas defensively I struggle, and this, Craig, ties into the Pete Kwiatkowski hire. When you look at his defenses at Washington, they were really good at taking the football away from you. I mean, the year they made the college football playoff in 2016, I think they had 33, 34 takeaways. So that's one of the things they really prided themselves on. Texas didn't do a good job last year playing the ball when it was in the air, specifically the corners. Guys got panicked a lot of the time. My colleague in the Longhorn Blitz podcast, Rod Babers, and Rod was an All-American corner at Texas, played at a high level, so knows what he's looking at. He charted it, and he figured about every 5 targets when the Texas corners last year were in man coverage situations, they were either giving up an explosive play of 16 yards or more, getting called for defensive holding, or getting called for a defensive pass interference. Likewise, it was about over 12 targets that were making a play on the ball. Those numbers have got to flip if this defensive scheme is going to work. And that, Craig, is my biggest question about Texas defensively. When you look at Pete Kwiatkowski's defenses at Washington, his ability to work with Jimmy Lake, Pete Kwiatkowski running the defensive front and Jimmy Lake running the secondary, their ability to work together to tie the front end with the back end. What is that relationship going to be like with Pete Kwiatkowski and Terry Joseph, who's the defensive pass game coordinator and works with the corners? How those two are able to work together to tie the front end to the back end. That could be the difference between this Texas defense being one that, they can maybe get you a stop when they need to, or maybe this defense being one of the better defenses in the Big 12.
Louisiana tomorrow night ought to be should be fun. I mean,
Last
maybe
ride in the Big 12, maybe?
Yeah, and who knows? You're right. Could be the last year that Texas is a part of the Big 12. A lot remains to be seen about what they in Oklahoma try to do. I'm not sure, Jeff, if you've kind of kept up with what's going on, but the train on the track with the Big 12 with UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, and Brigham Young. And this does appear to have more than just this is more than reporting. I've been able to say some things, Paul, Craig, and we've been able to report some things as well. Your thoughts about maybe those four?
Yeah, when the Big 12 explored expansion, what was that, probably 2-3 years ago, my idea was, hey, take BYU and Boise and add them for football only and keep everything else at 10 because, men's basketball, women's basketball, baseball, everything else is fine. Just add those two members that's football-only members. Obviously, that didn't happen, but I think for this league, if this league is going to stay together and the Big 12 is going to exist in some form once Texas and Oklahoma are gone, quite frankly, I think BYU has to be a part of that mix. And then if you're talking about adding other schools, I think Houston brings a lot. You've got some traditional rivalries with some of those old Southwest Conference rivalries that I think can get fan bases excited again with Houston coming to the league. And then Cincinnati and UCF, they've been in New Year's Six bowls, and they've had unbeaten regular seasons, and they've been ranked in the top 10 within the last decade, and they do have some relevance. So I think in terms of brands and teams that kind of have at least some, I don't know, drawing power is the right word you want to use, but at least allow the Big 12 to have an argument to maintain status as a Power 5 conference. That's probably the best you can do right there as those four schools.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Craig, you did a segment for a long time together, and glad to have you with us. Can't wait for the next time. Good luck watching, covering. Ought to be a hell of a game, Louisiana and Texas tomorrow down at DKR. And then the Ricky Williams, Earl Campbell Field as well, as far as finally being able to kind of put the official bow on that as well. That's Jeff Howe, 247 Sports on the Horn, and Austin as well with us when we talk UT football.
Yeah, I was glad that he was available to be on our show, and that was when we were talking in the off season about people that we could talk to regularly. That was one I went to. I love talking to Jeff, and I think he does a really good job covering Texas football and just breaking it down I really enjoy it. So enjoyed that. I mean, obviously, Texas has got quite a buzz going on outside of the realignment. I mean, just with what the new coaches have done, and you hear the big change there of just a little bit of that arrogance is missing for right now, right? So that alone to me is an upgrade over the last guy, that's for sure.